Welcome to another episode of the inside look of creating the Coder's Tape website. If you're not familiar with this series, in this series we actually are just taking a look at how I am creating the Coder's Tape website, and I'm bringing you along so you know the tips and tricks powering this actual production app. So today we're going to be working on a feature that I think is kind of cool. There's going to be a lot of Vue involved, so I think that you'll really enjoy this. So right now, if you took a look at any of these episodes, if you are logged in, you can actually mark any of these as completed. Let me head back over here, and you see that this one is now marked as completed. If we go to the second episode, what we have here is a mark as complete. So yes, I could hit the button whenever I'm done with this episode, but what I want to work on today is detecting when this video that is playing up here ends. And when it does, I want to simply mark it as complete automatically. Now this is kind of an expected behavior whenever you finish the video. It means that you basically completed the lesson. So instead of having to manually do it, I want to automatically do it. Now this is a little bit tricky, and the only reason why is because this is actually a YouTube embedded player. It is not an actual player in my website. So let's jump to code and let me show you what I have for that. If we go to my lessons show view and we scroll up, then of course we see the notes and we see this right here, this iframe. So this iframe here is what YouTube actually gives us whenever you want to embed a YouTube video. Now all it is just going into the embed and using what I call the lesson path, which is just simply the code that YouTube gives it. We're able to create a player right on the website. Let me actually jump over to the local version. Here's my local version of it. And so what I want to do is, if we go into any one of these lessons, then of course we do have a video. Let me go ahead and log in. And now that we are logged in, then of course we do see we can mark as complete. So we're going to have to do a little bit of change. But in order for us to actually be able to use this in Vue, there's a very nice Vue package that we can use. So let's take a look at that now. Let's do a quick Google search for vue-youtube-embed. And if we look right here, it's called vue-youtube-embedded. Now this package is fairly simple to pull in. We really just need to use it. But then the nice thing is this. If we scroll down a little bit, we have these events. And these are the events that I want to hook into. Of course, the one that we are interested in today is this ended event. So this is going to allow us to hook up to an event that occurs in the player. Of course, in our case, when the video ends, I want to go ahead and hit a specific endpoint, and I want to complete the lesson. That way, when the video is done, the lesson is already marked as complete. So let's go ahead and pull this in and follow the instructions and see what we have to do. So of course, we're going to use npm for this. So all we need to do is copy this. Let's go back to the terminal, and I do have npm run watch already running in the background. Let me create a new tab, and let's go into my Coder's Tape directory. And then let's go ahead and run that npm command to pull in the vue-youtube-embedded package. While this is running, if we go back here, let's take a look at the instructions. So it looks like all we need to do is import YouTube, and then we can use this vue.use. This is the way that we tell Vue that we're going to have this external library that we want to pull in. So let's go back to PHP Storm. So now let's take a look at our app.js file. Let me pull it up here on the side. If we take a look at resources.js, here it is, app.js. So this is the file that we are looking for. Remember, this is the file that bootstraps all of the front end in Laravel. I do have a couple of components already in place, but right underneath the components, we can hit paste. So now we have access to this vue-youtube-embedded plugin, and we're telling Vue to go ahead and use it. Let's see what's next in the instructions. Let's go back to Chrome. And here it is. So the usage for this is we simply have to call this YouTube, and then it needs a video ID and then the video ID. Now, if you recall, the video ID in my case is that path. It's this one right here, this lesson path. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. Let me copy this and bring it in here just for now. I'm going to, of course, comment out the iframe because I don't need two players. Our video ID, we're going to grab using this Blade syntax right here that we had before. Now, in the documentation, this is being bound. But if we were to actually bind this into place, it wouldn't actually work because this right here just needs to be treated as a string. So we're going to go ahead and not bind the video ID. So if we go back to Chrome, If we did everything correctly, when we hit refresh, of course, we should get the exact same thing. So we did. Perfect. So that's good news. Now, the thing about this is that for us to be able to actually listen to this event, let's go ahead and wrap this in a component. So once we wrap this in a component, we're going to be able to actually have control. So let me go ahead and cut this out and let's create a new component. Let's go into the resources.js components, and I'm just going to actually duplicate this complete lesson component. We're going to rewrite most of this anyway, but let's go ahead and just start with something instead of starting totally from scratch. So let's say YouTube iframe. That's what I'm going to call this component. And let's go ahead and delete everything that's inside of here. And let's start a fresh div. Let's just give it a class. And simply because if ever I need to hook into it, it'll be nice to have a class name for that. And then inside of here is where I'll actually have this YouTube. Now we immediately run into an issue, which is of course, we don't have Blade inside Vue. But we'll tackle that in just a second. For my props, let me go ahead and clean this out. Let me clean out all of my methods here. And computer properties, I'll do the same. All right. So this is what we end up with. This is our starting point for this YouTube iframe. All right, so how do we get the lesson path? Well, the best thing we could do is probably just pass in the entire lesson. Instead of just trying to pass in the path, we have a nice way for Laravel to pass in an entire model as a JSON object. So let's take that approach. But before we get to that, of course, this Vue component is not registered with our app. We need to register it. So let's go back here, and in our component section, let's register a new component for YouTube iframe. And of course, we're going to require that out of YouTube iframe.vue. So with that, we've of course added that into our app.js. Now you saw the compiler fail, and if we go back here into the terminal, of course, we are failing at that point where we're trying to do the Blade syntax. But let's go ahead and fix that now. Let me go to my show view, and instead of having that iframe, I'm going to delete that altogether. Let's go ahead and add what we actually need. So what we have is YouTube iframe. That's what we're going to have. And then what do we do to pass in that object, like I said? Well, we can simply say lesson equals, and then we can actually just pass in the entire lesson, like so. Now, we do need to bind this. And when we bind this, that's what's going to tell Vue, hey, this is actually an object, not just a string. So we're going to bind a lesson into our YouTube iframe, and all we need to do is just output lesson. Laravel actually knows what to do. Yes, you can actually even call the to JSON if you wanted to, but it's not necessary. Laravel actually knows how to do this. That's the nice thing about working with Vue and Laravel. Now, in our YouTube iframe component, we need to accept a prop, and the prop that we're going to accept is lesson. Now, lesson at this point is going to be an object. So we can say this.lesson.path. And if we bind this, now this is going to be referring to this, of course, and then lesson is going to be referring to the prop that we're passing in, but the prop that we are passing in through here is an entire model, not just one particular piece of data. So we can actually access path using this dot syntax. Of course, this is just JavaScript stuff. All right, let me hit save now. And if we did everything right back in Chrome, we should basically get the exact same thing. And we do. Our video is still working, but this time, now we are wrapping all of this inside its own component. So how cool is that? Now, what's next? Well, we have that event. Now in Vue, to grab an event, we use the @ syntax, and we have that ended event. If you recall, if we go back here, we do have this section down here for events. And the one that we are interested in, again, is the ended one. So let me go ahead and just do a quick alert. So when ended, what we need to do here is actually call a method. Let's just call it lesson ended. And then in my methods, let's create a new one called lesson ended. So when lesson ended gets called, what do we need to do? I'm just going to alert ended just to prove that it works. All right, let's give this a go. I'm going to hit refresh one more time here. I'm going to hit the video, and of course, let's just go ahead and skip to the very ending of this video. And if we did everything right, the video ends, and of course, we do get this alert, the ended alert. Great. So we are actually getting notified when the video ends. So when the video ends, that event gets triggered, and then we're going to trigger this method right here. Now, I have another component, which is this complete lesson component. Now, this is the component that you see down here, this mark as complete component. So if we look down here, there's this submit method on it. And what it does is it does an Axios post to /complete. And then with the lesson ID, we're able to actually mark the lesson as complete. If we take a look at my route file, web.php, we go down here to complete lesson. There we go. And we're hitting this complete lessons controller. Now, the thing about complete lessons controller, let me show you, is that it actually uses a method of toggle. So what it does, it's a many-to-many relationship between a user and a lesson called completed. So it toggles the relationship in and out. So every time you hit that endpoint, if that lesson was already marked as completed, then what it will do is uncomplete it. And it will also do that in inverse. If it hasn't been completed yet, it will complete it. Now, this functionality is not really going to work anymore. And the reason is that whenever the video ends, of course, we want to complete the lesson. So if the user had never completed the lesson before, it will work. But what will actually happen is that if the person had completed that lesson previously, then it will toggle it, which means that it will uncomplete the lesson. And that's not the functionality that we want. So we're going to have to do a little bit of refactor here in order to make that work. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a whole new entire controller for uncompleting lessons, essentially dividing that into two completely separate controllers. So let's do something in this controller. All I really need to do here is sync without detaching. So sync without detaching, what it will do is actually make sure that our lesson is completed. Now, the nice thing with sync without detaching is that it will work whether the lesson has been completed before or not. Because if we ran sync only, what it will do is it will only complete this one lesson. And we don't want that. We don't want to replace any other completions, but rather we want to make sure that this one is attached. So we'll use sync without detaching. Then I'm going to actually save as this file and then call it uncomplete lesson controller. I'm going to hit OK. And we're going to have a whole new controller here called uncomplete lessons controller. So in the inverse action, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to detach. That's all we need to do. We need to make sure that we detach that lesson. And so now we have two separate controllers, one for attaching lessons and one for detaching lessons. So we need to do one more change, and that is, of course, in my routes. We need to create a whole new route, and let's call it uncomplete lesson. And then, of course, now we're going to be calling the uncomplete lessons controller. In my original complete lesson view, we can no longer just hit complete because that's only ever going to attach a lesson. We need to toggle in our view between completing and uncompleting. So what we can do is I have this status variable, and status, when status is equal to 1, it means the lesson is completed. So we need to hit the incomplete, and vice versa whenever status is equal to 0. So here's what we can do. Let's do let action. We're going to create this variable. And what we're going to say is this status. So if this status is true, in that case, we're going to hit the uncomplete. But if it's false, then we need to hit complete. So I will actually replace this hard-coded complete for this new action. Does that make sense? So we're going to set this action equal to the opposite of what needs to happen. If we need to uncomplete the lesson, then of course we're going to hit /uncomplete/ and then the lesson ID. Then if we need to complete the lesson, then of course we're going to hit /complete. So this makes it dynamic. That way we are toggling between those two things. So let's go back here to Chrome and let's just make sure that that is still working. So right now, I'm going to mark this lesson as complete. Okay, so it looks like it got marked as complete. And if we go back to all lessons, yes, it was completed. All right, now let's mark it as incomplete. And let's go back to all lessons. And yes, it's not marked as completed. Awesome. So that is still working. So that's going to help us because now we have a place for lesson ended to actually hit. And so all we need to do in here is, if we come back to completed lesson, is basically copy this Axios right here. So all we need to do is hit slash, and in this case I don't need it to be dynamic because I know whenever the video ends I'm always going to want to complete. But because we used that sync without detaching, we're not going to have a bunch of duplicates for completions in our database. We're just going to have the one. So this lesson ID, how do we get the lessons ID? Well, if you recall, we have the entire lesson. So all we really need is just to grab the ID. So we can grab this.lesson.id, because remember, we have the entire model. That's the nice thing about passing in the entire model into our view. So after the response has been done, well, we don't really need to do anything. So we're just going to go ahead and comment that out. Now, of course, you're going to see what's going to actually happen, and we are going to want to do something. But for now, this code will work. And so we have a nice working example of this. Let me go back to Chrome, and I'm going to hit one of these lessons, and I will actually attempt to complete the lesson without hitting the button. So let me skip over to the ending. Let's give it a couple of seconds to finish. And there it is, the lesson completed. Now notice I have not hit that mark as complete. I'm going to head back to all lessons, and sure enough, that lesson is completed. Let's do the same with this other one, just to prove that it works. Hit play, skip to the very ending, wait for it to finish. There it is, it just finished. Back to all lessons, and that one is also completed. Awesome, good job. So that is actually working. We have one small issue though. Check this out. If you look down here, right at the mark as completed, whenever the video ends, I kind of expect that to say mark as incomplete, because, well, it doesn't make sense for it to continue to say that. So if we go to the end, right, the video ends. Now we know this lesson has been completed, but yet we still see this as mark as completed. But if we hit refresh, now it says mark as incomplete. So that UI is not quite working. We need to let that other component know, hey, you know what? This lesson just got completed in another component. So what we need to do is actually fire an event. But we're going to run into a bit of an issue, because when the Axios completes, yes, I can say this emit, and let's just call it lesson complete. We can do that. But if you recall back in my show view, so this component would be the one that's firing the event, but this is the component that we actually needed to receive the event. And that's not quite gonna work. And the reason why that's not gonna work is because the only thing that we have connecting these two is our parent view instance. And we don't really want to mess with the parent view instance. So we have a couple of different options. Yes, we could actually wrap both of them inside a view component, but that's going to bring in a couple of different issues. And mostly what it's going to do is that we have all of this Blade syntax stuff here that is going to be very difficult to replace with Vue. It's going to cause a lot of headaches for us to actually be able to do that. Whenever you're transferring from Blade into components, of course, everything needs to be provided to the component, and you no longer have things like guest. We don't have the ability to check if a user is signed in or not. So that would complicate everything tremendously. If we tried to wrap this whole entire thing in a Vue component, it would be almost impossible to replicate. But there's a nice solution for this, and it is something that I actually learned not too long ago. So I wanted to share it with you. So what we're going to do is something called Vue portals. So Vue portals will allow you to have code and place it somewhere else. It's actually quite cool. So this is the way it works. Now this animation here kind of gives you a glimpse of what Portal Vue will do. So this would actually allow us to have a portal. Think of a portal as a black hole. From our component, we can actually have a destination that is outside of our component. So the way that it would work is that we would, instead of having complete lesson here, we would actually have a portal. Basically, just a place for us to target. And then inside our YouTube iframe, we can actually have complete lesson. So it would look something like if we cut this out and we brought it inside that YouTube iframe. If we put that down here, of course, right now, that would render right after this, but a portal will actually allow us to push this into a separate part of our view. It's pretty cool. Let's get started with it, and I think you'll kind of understand how it works. So let's go ahead and install it, very similar to how we did with the YouTube. So let's just go ahead and install that. And while that is running, of course, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to import Portal Vue, and then we're going to use it. So if you remember, of course, that goes in our app.js file right here, and we already have YouTube. So let's go ahead and add another line for Portal Vue. Now let's go ahead and just add the semicolons. Not necessary, but I do like the way they look. So now we have this Portal Vue. So let's check out the documentation. So here's this simple example. You're going to have this portal destination, and all this is just a named destination. Then somewhere else in your code, not even inside the same component, you're going to have this portal target, and the name is going to match the target of over here. So let's go ahead and try that now. So we're going to have a portal-target, and then we need to give it a name. Where does that go? Well, that's going to go inside our show where our completed lesson component used to sit. Of course, we're going to replace that with this new portal target, and we need to give it a name, and let's just call it complete lesson. So now we have the target, but now of course we need to have the actual source. So let's jump back to YouTube iframe, and let's actually take this and let's wrap it inside a portal. So inside this portal, we'll put our complete lesson, and then of course we need to set the target. Now the target is going to match the exact same name that we named over here. So complete lesson. So let's go back and let's name that complete lesson. All right, so we're going to have to do a couple of modifications here. Of course, we were using Blade before, so we don't have access to these anymore. So we need the lesson ID. Well, that's simple. We already fixed this. So let's say this.lesson.id. And then we go ahead and bind that. And then we need a status. So the status is the initial status of the lesson, meaning has the user completed this lesson. Now, in order for us to actually be able to do that, we need Blade and we need PHP. So that's not going to work. But here's what we can do is, of course, into my YouTube iframe, I still have access to Blade. I can actually bring this out into where I do have access to Blade, and then I can pass status into my YouTube iframe. And then my YouTube iframe, of course, can accept status as a prop. And then we can simply just pass it through. We could just say this.status. We can pass that right on through into our complete lesson. And with that, we've brought that in. Now, if we did everything correct, we should actually not see any changes at all. Let's hit refresh. And sure enough, check that out. We have mark as incomplete. And if we hit that, now it says complete. And that is working perfectly fine. But now that is using a portal. How cool is that? I think it's an unbelievable way for us to still integrate backend with frontend using Vue. Now, I know it's a little bit of an advanced topic, but I think that once you kind of see it working, I think it starts to make sense. Again, all we're doing is opening this target. The target is where your code is eventually going to end up in. Remember that Vue uses a virtual DOM, and a virtual DOM is capable of basically doing anything you want. So there's no reason why that complete lesson actually needs to sit there. We can put it somewhere else, such as inside our YouTube iframe, and inside of there, we can have a portal to complete lesson, and then we have access to that. Now, the nice thing with this is that once we end, we can actually change the status. Now, this is going to give us an error because it's a prop that's being passed in. We'll fix that in just a second. But when the video completes, we can say this status, and then you can just set that equal to 1. Because remember, 1 means that it is completed. So no matter what status was originally, we can just set that to 1. And I think that now this will fix our issue. Let's go back to Chrome. And let's look for a lesson that has not been completed. How about this one right here? So this, of course, says down here, it says mark as complete. Let's go ahead and play this video, get to the ending, keep paying attention down here, and let's see if we can get this to work. So I'm going to hit down here at the end, lesson ends, and check that out. It is now marked as incomplete. So it's working, everything is good, but if we check out the console, we should have an error. And there it is. The error that we're getting is simply that we are actually changing a prop directly. Vue doesn't want you to do that. What's happening is that these props that are passed in are considered immutable, meaning that you're not supposed to change them. So to fix that, what we can actually do is have our own data object, and in our data object, we can actually have our very own version of the same thing. That way we can change status. Let's set it to something like current status. And then initially, this is just going to be equal to this status. So my current status is just going to point to status initially. But then we can actually change current status instead of this status. Current status, what we're going to pass in is not this status, but this current status. And I think that'll fix it for us. Let me hit refresh. Now notice that this lesson is already completed, so let's pick a new lesson, maybe this one. Pay attention down here again, mark as completed, and let me go ahead and open up the console to see if we get any errors. Let me clear it out. All right, let's play that video. Let's get to the end, skip to the end, and there we go. The lesson ended, we marked it as completed, and we did not get an error. So now when we go back, then of course that lesson is completed. So how cool is that? We learned a lot in this lesson. We used a portal, we created a new component. There was a lot of advanced stuff in this episode. But again, in this series, I just want to take you behind the scenes so that you see how a real production app gets created, and then you can actually go into the website and try it out. So if you don't have an account yet, make sure you head over to coderstape.com. And in here, you can check out all of the things that we've been working on our website. Now, by the time that you see this video, of course, this feature will already be implemented. And so you'll be able to mark your lessons as complete without even having to hit the button. So with that, that's it for today's episode. I hope you're enjoying this format. As always, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. My name is Victor for Coders Tape. Thanks for watching.